Welcome everyone. I am Vaibhav Saini. I work at the Center for Research Innovation at Northeastern University. As many of you may know, Center for Research Innovation is the technology transfer arm of the university. And our primary objective is to protect and to help commercialize the intellectual property which is generated across the university campuses. When this groundbreaking research is taking place, we are all aware of how different federal agencies fund the creation of that IP. In today's seminar, what we will learn is how one of these federal agencies, which is the National Institutes of Health, through its several different institutes, also provides resources for early stage de-risking of this groundbreaking research. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Stephanie Davis, who works at the NIH at NHLBI, to take over and start the program.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Davis. I am the Small Business Program Lead for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So myself and all of my other fantastic colleagues are joining today, and we're going to be giving you an overview of how the NIH Small Business Program funds biomedical innovations and some of the resources that might be of interest to the Northeastern University community. So I'm going to share my screen. And so before I get started, can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So thank you, everyone. So what I'm going to be doing is going over how the NIH Small Business Program supports biomedical innovation. So just a brief introduction to the Small Business Grant Program. These programs consist of two sister programs called the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR program, and the Small Business Technology Transfer, or STTR program. So together at the NIH, these programs make up $1.3 billion in dedicated set-aside funding from the NIH's research and development budget. And these programs specifically go towards small business concerns, which are often university spin-out companies and startups that are developing new technologies that are of interest to the NIH's mission. So the SBIR program is the parent program. This at the NIH is about $1.14 billion. And it is specifically designed to give funding towards small business concerns that are developing technologies and engaging in R&D. The STTR program is very similar to the SBIR program, although the budget is much smaller. It's about $160 million. And this program is specifically designed to facilitate collaborations between US-based research institutions, usually universities, and small business concerns with the end goal of developing technologies to be commercialized. So what are the benefits of the NIH Small Business Program? So as you can see, the NIH funds, the NIH Small Business Program funds all the way from the earliest stages of proof of concept all the way up to early stage scale up and manufacturing. So research grants, so R01s, R21s, and other similar mechanisms, they primarily focus on funding basic research and discovery. Small business grants tend to fund a little bit more advanced technological development than the research grants. So they are taking those findings from the basic research and discovery and using them to create technologies that can align well with the NIH's mission. And so our goal as the NIH Small Business Program is to provide a large source of early stage capital for life sciences focused companies. So this is essentially a free source of money. If you get funded through a grant, you don't have to pay it back. It is not going to, we're not going to take equity, and companies that get this funding, what they can do is they can use it to de-risk their technology so that they are attractive to private sources of funding, including angel investors, venture capital firms, and strategic partners. Usually these sources of investment are not going to invest in very, very risky early stage technologies. But the NIH, since our goal is not to make a profit, it is to advance human health, we are willing to invest in these earlier stage technologies and help you de-risk them to the point that these other private sources of investment find them attractive. As I mentioned, the Small Business Program is made up of two sister programs, the SBIR and STTR program. So they are more alike than they are different, but there are a few key differences. Although in both cases, the award is always made to the small business. So in the case of SBIR grants, these will allow the small business to partner with an academic partner, but it is not required. For STTR grants, there is a required partnership with a nonprofit research institution. For SBIR grants, there is usually more of the work is going to be done by the small business, and there are some limited outsourcing that can be done where in earlier stage awards, other parties can do up to 33% of the work, and then in later stage, they can do up to 50%. In STTR grants, there are minimum work requirements and thus budgetary requirements for both the small business and the research institution partner. So for an STTR grant, the small business must take at least 40% of the budget and do 40% of the work, while the university partner must do at least 30% of the work and take 30% of the budget. For SBIR grants, the primary employment of the contact PI must be with the small business at the time of the award. With an STTR, the PI can either be employed with the small business or with the research institution partner. And so I wanted to stress this in particular. The STTR mechanism is really an ideal mechanism for academic entrepreneurs who want to keep their day jobs. So if you're a faculty member at Northeastern and you don't want to leave your tenured faculty position, an STTR grant is a great way for you to maintain that university affiliation while still getting funding for your spin-out company. So what are the eligibility criteria for applicants for the small business program? So first of all, the applicant organization must be organized as a for-profit US-based company. And the size of the company must be 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates. I should note that most of the companies we fund are far smaller than that, so usually fewer than 50 employees. The work must be done in the US. So research project grants at the NIH are usually fairly flexible in allowing foreign components. Small business grants, due to regulations of the Small Business Administration, are pretty strict on that. So with the exception of cases where the work cannot be done in the US, the small business grant program is pretty strict about only funding activities that take place within the US. Additionally, there are ownership requirements for small businesses that apply for the SBIR and STTR programs. So they must be at least 50% US owned and operated. If the business is owned by another business, that business must be at least 50% US owned and operated. And then if you are an SBIR applicant only, this doesn't apply to STTRs, if you are more than 50% owned and operated by multiple VC firms, that is fine as long as one firm does not have a majority share. And just a reminder that all of these criteria are determined at the time of the award. So the small business program occurs in phases. You might have seen in a previous slide that there was a reference to phase 1 and phase 2. So these are not references to clinical trials. Phase 1 and phase 2 more refers to the technological development level in each of these grant phases. So phase 1 grants, these are usually about a year long, but they can range from 6 months to 2 years. The budget right now at the NIH is around $306,000, and this mostly supports early stage proof of concept and feasibility work. Phase 2 studies are 1 to 3 years, on average 2 years in length, and just over $2 million. And these are going to support more extensive R&D activities leading up into the early stages of scale up and manufacturing. There are some other options that applicants can pursue outside the standard phase 1 to phase 2 pipeline. So for instance, SBIR and STTR applicants who essentially want to avoid the funding gap between the phases can apply for what's known as a fast track mechanism. And I call this a 2-for-1 special because you're essentially applying for 2 grants. And if you get funded through a fast track, you'll get funded for the phase 1, and then you'll have conditional funding for the phase 2. Conditional meaning it depends upon whether or not the phase 1 proposal meets its intended milestones. And SBIR applicants have the option to skip over the phase 1 and go to a direct to phase 2 proposal if they have already supported phase 1 equivalent work using non-federal funds. And some NIH institutes and centers participate in additional funding opportunities beyond the phase 2, and my colleagues who participate in these will be sharing these opportunities in their sections. And finally, some institutes and centers have what's known as a phase 3, where the agency acts as the buyer of the technology. The NIH doesn't have this. So beyond the phase 2 and phase 2B stages, when we say a company is in phase 3, what we really mean is that it is being primarily supported by private investors or commercial market partners. So most of the applications that we get at the NIH are through general, what's known as omnibus notices of funding opportunity. And these are investigator-initiated proposals. So we're not looking for a particular technology type or disease focus. Essentially, if it falls within the mission of the NIH, it will be accepted through these funding opportunities and assigned appropriately to an institute or center. Some institutes and centers participate in targeted funding opportunities. So these have separate due dates and they often have different budget limits. So just be careful to read the notice of funding opportunity very carefully for these distinctions. Also, some institutes and centers participate in contract solicitations. These actually just closed 2 days ago, but these are accepted once a year and focus on very narrow topics with expected deliverables. So small business grants are reviewed using the same scored review criteria as RO1s and other research project grants, but the way that they are interpreted is a little bit differently. So for example, while basic science grants, including RO1s, are mostly, the significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment are going to focus on, with an end goal of scientific discovery, the end goal of small business grants is the development of a new product or technology or innovative solution to an unmet medical or scientific need. So for example, significance focuses on how well does this technology or solution solve a problem in the real world, and does it have commercial potential? For the investigators, there's a bigger focus on the team rather than just the PI, because small businesses are team efforts. So it's not just looking at the PI, we're looking at the expertise of all senior and key personnel across the board. For innovation, we're looking at, does this technology that's being proposed, is it novel, or does it have a significant improvement or competitive advantage over its competitors? For approach, we're looking at, does the research design, is it going to accomplish the goals that are laid out in the proposal? Is it feasible? Are there any major pitfalls that are identified by the reviewers? And for the environment, of course, it's just going to focus on, are the facilities and resources that are available, are they enough to accomplish the activities that are proposed in the grant? There are other review criteria that are not scored individually, but do factor into the final impact score. And then, of course, there are some other review criteria that, while they don't affect the impact score, they are going to be brought up by the reviewers. And small business grants have their own special emphasis panels. So the standard study sections that review RO1s are not going to review small business grants. The reason for this is because small business study sections have a balance of scientific, clinical, and business expertise that is often not present on the standard study sections. So the NIH Small Business Program is overseen by the SEED Office, or the Small Business Education and Entrepreneurial Development Office. And one thing that the SEED Office has for all of the grantees across the institutes and centers is they have a lot of subject matter expertise and in-house support that can help funded companies with their business development and regulatory efforts. There are entrepreneurial support programs, which we are going to be talking more about later in the presentation. And additionally, companies that receive grant support and contract support through the small business program have the opportunity to apply to present at one of these partnering and investor showcases so that they can better connect with potential investors and strategic partners. So in addition to the grant funding, there is a lot of non-monetary support that the NIH offers to researchers that are trying to commercialize their technologies. So one program that I wanted to specifically highlight for attendees is the Applicant Assistance Program. So if you're brand new to the small business program, I would strongly recommend looking into this program. A lot of the institutes that are present here today participate in this program. And if you apply and are selected for this program, you'll get a coach that's going to essentially help you put together a phase 1 application. So as long as you haven't gotten previously funded through the small business program, you are eligible to apply for the applicant assistance program. Although I will say that we highly encourage applications from businesses that are owned and led by women and or underrepresented minority individuals. So I've included the link to the AAP website. The application portal just opened a few days ago, and the due date is going to be December 12th. So I highly encourage anyone to check this out if they have an idea that they'd like to submit for a small business grant. And so now we're going to get into my institute's portion of the presentation. So as the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute's name suggests, we are interested in funding innovative heart, lung, blood, and sleep-focused solutions. With a minor caveat, if you are developing anything for lung or blood cancers, you're actually going to want to contact our friends at the National Cancer Institute. But any non-oncological diseases that focus on heart, lung, blood, or sleep-specific indications, we are interested in. So I've included this pie chart to show the different types of technologies that we fund. Just a reminder that this breakdown will shift based on what proposals we get through the investigator-initiated funding opportunities, but we are a fairly device-heavy institute. In addition to about a third of our portfolio focusing on therapeutics, we have about 36% focusing on surgical and therapeutic devices under the supportive devices umbrella, about 9% focusing on digital health, 7% focusing on monitoring or diagnostic devices, and then 5% each focused on research tools, in vitro diagnostics, and imaging devices. So here's just a brief overview of some of the diseases that we focus on in our mission space. And just a reminder that this does not cover every disease we're interested in. We're also interested in rare and orphan indications that affect heart, lung, blood, or sleep function. So if you have any questions about whether your technology or your proposal fits within our mission space, it's always a good idea to ask. So this diagram just shows the different levels of support that is offered by the NHLBI Small Business Program. I'm not going to be going into every single one of these programs, but what I wanted to emphasize is that we offer support through phase 1, phase 2, as well as phase 2B grants that go beyond the phase 2 program. And we also provide support for our companies through several different entrepreneurial education and administrative supplement programs. But in addition to the grant programs and supplements, we also have subject matter experts in-house who can provide support and mentorship to our grantees. So in addition to providing monetary support, we also try to provide non-monetary support and guidance to ensure that our companies successfully complete their proposals and find a good return on investment. So in addition to the omnibus funding opportunity announcements, which I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we receive most of our applications through those, but we also have some targeted notices of funding opportunity. So just a reminder that some of these are notices of special interest that attach to the omnibus, and some of these are special requests for applications that have unique due dates. So in addition to the phase 1 and 2, we also participate in, as I said, phase 2B programs, which offer up to $3 million of support beyond the phase 2 portion. We also participate in the Helping End Addiction Long-Term Initiative, Enhanced Pain Management, Small Business, RFA. So if you're developing a technology that's focused on pain management in heart, lung, blood, or sleep conditions, then this is a good RFA to apply to. And then we have several other notices of special interest where if you're applying to the omnibus and your application falls under one of these topic areas, you can indicate that you're applying through this notice in your application. So as I mentioned, we have several subject matter experts and entrepreneurs in residence in-house that can provide support to our small businesses. So here is an overview of my very esteemed colleagues who have expertise in all of these different areas related to product commercialization. So in addition to offering their expertise to the review of projects and grants, they can also offer one-on-one consults with our grantees to help them with some of their product development related challenges. And one program I wanted to emphasize that is not small business, but it is focused on technology development, is the NHLBI Catalyze program. So Catalyze is similar to the small business program in many ways, but it is a little bit different. So we give out fewer Catalyze awards, and these can go to either small businesses or academic investigators. And in addition to providing grant support, we also have a team of experts in-house that can provide individualized support to all of our Catalyze grantees. So if you're developing a technology and you don't have a company yet, Catalyze is a really good program to check out. And so Catalyze has two different components. We have RFAs that specifically focus on product definition activities for drugs, biologics, devices, diagnostics, and enabling technologies. And then we also have the Catalyze preclinical services, which support more later stage activities. The Catalyze program does not support clinical trials, but a lot of the same activities that small business grants support are supported by Catalyze. And so here are the different funding opportunities. So the next due date is going to be November 21st, which is only a few days away. The next due date after that is going to be February 21st. But these are broken down by technology type. So if you're developing, for example, a small molecule or a biologic, there are the two therapeutic focused RFAs in the middle, likewise for enabling technologies and devices and diagnostics. So if you have questions about this program, I'm happy to answer it after the webinar. And if you'd like to follow us, please feel free to scan the QR codes to go to our website, the Innovation Commercialization Office. And if you'd like to stay up to date on all of our different events and programs, I'd recommend signing up for our newsletter. And now I'm going to be turning it over to my colleague, Kenneth Kim, who's going to be giving an overview of NIAID.
All right, thank you, Stephanie, and good morning, everyone. My name is Kenneth Kim. There we go. And I'm going to be just briefly touching on some of the NIAID small business programs. Next slide, please. So NIAID conducts and supports basic and applied research to better understand, treat, and ultimately prevent infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. We do have a unique dual mandate that requires the Institute to respond to emerging public health threats. And so, as you can imagine, these last few years have been quite interesting for us. To really sum this slide up, if you are developing a vaccine, therapeutic, or diagnostic for an immune or infectious disease, NIAID is likely the right home for your proposal. Next slide, please. So we don't yet know our FY24 funding levels, but I can say that last year in FY23, NIAID had an SBIR STTR budget of just over $195 million. That is the second largest at the NIH. And so again, if you are developing a vaccine, therapeutic, or diagnostic, NIAID could be a fantastic source for you to access some non-dilutive capital to support your R&D. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to just briefly touch on some of the NIAID-specific SBIR and STTR programs and policies. Up first is our award budget limits. So NIAID can make SBIR, STTR Phase 1 awards up to $300,000 per year for 2 years, and Phase 2 awards at $1 million per year for up to 3 years. We do participate in both the Phase 2B and the CRP programs. And an important thing to note is that NIAID does not support any clinical trial work via our standard SBIR, STTR grant mechanisms. Instead, we exclusively utilize our SBIR Phase 2 cooperative agreement. You can find that looking up the solicitation PAR 2182. And we also fund all of our applications based off of scientific merit. And so if your application scores at or better than our published pay lines, you will be funded. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to focus in on two pre-award, no-cost training programs we have available here at NIAD. Up first is the NIAD Small Business Applicant Assistance Program, or AAP. An important thing to note here is that this is a separate and standalone program from the NIH AAP. And so this is a NIAD-specific applicant assistance program. It operates, quite similarly in that we offer assessment, coaching, proposal development, and assistance, as well as post-submission support for both phase 1 and phase 2 2B applicants. Our goal here is to really improve the overall quality of applications and to increase accessibility for underrepresented entrepreneurs and investigators. And so if you have any questions about the NIAD AAP program, feel free to reach out to my wonderful colleague, Hujiao English, at hujiao.english@nih.gov. Next slide, please. The second program I'd like to focus in on is the NIAD Innovator to Entrepreneur Program, or ITEP. This is a brand new program, and it's designed to assist participants in making the transition from innovator to first-time entrepreneur. Innovator being someone who has a strong technical background, making that jump to entrepreneurship. And so really, you can look at this as a no-cost accelerator program that focuses on entrepreneurship, startup operations, and we throw a little bit of grantsmanship in there, but nowhere near the level of AAP. So ITEP will support 2 cohorts of 20 participants in its inaugural year, and we are on track to start enrolling our first cohort sometime very early in 2024. And the best way to stay in the loop is to subscribe to our listserv using this link here. And if you have any specific questions about the NIAD ITEP program, you can contact me, kenneth.kim2@nih.gov. Next slide, please. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up with really the most important pieces of advice that I can give you if you have any interest at all in applying for an SBIR, STTR. And that's really to reach out to and discuss your proposal with program staff ahead of time. We are here to help. We want to hear from you, and we don't bite. The only thing we ask is that you please prepare a non-confidential abstract of your technology that includes these specific aims of your proposal. That really helps us determine, is your proposal the right fit for NIAD, or is it a better fit for one of my other colleagues at another NIH institute. And finally, this is not something that you can do last minute, so please start early and submit early. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention on behalf of the entire NIAD small business team. I believe we are fielding questions at the end. And so if you have any questions for me, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll revisit them at the end of the session. Thank you.
So we have the NIMHD. Do we lose audio?
Hi.
The audio yeah, all right. Michael is there.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, my name is Lieutenant Commander Michael Banyas. I am the program manager for the National Institute of Minority Health Disparities. Next slide. So NIMHD is a disease agnostic institute, which means that we don't focus on a particular disease like cancer or cardiovascular issues like Dr. Davis's institute does, but we coordinate on health equity and health disparities issues across the NIH. Our focus is not drugs, but devices, services, digital health, and other means to close health equity gaps. The mission of our program is we promote research to understand and improve the health of racial and ethnic minority populations, advance scientific understanding of the causes of health disparities, develop and test interventions to reduce health disparities, and also create and improve scientific methods, metrics, and measures for to support health disparities research. In essence, what we do is we try to understand why people aren't getting care and have poor health outcomes, and invest in companies that help create health equity and deliver those services to that untapped customer base. Next slide. So just to touch upon some of the mechanisms leading to health disparities. There are individual behaviors such as lifestyle, beliefs, and attitudes, biological processes and genetics, such as people that have sickle cell anemia or other genetic components, like they're born with a disability. There's a physical and cultural environment, such as someone that has been born into poverty, or they live in rural populations. And there's also clinical and healthcare events, such as poor communication, non-culturally appropriate treatments, and the progression of disease within that community or that population. Next slide. So when I talk about health disparity, the definition of health disparity is a health difference that adversely affects disadvantaged populations in comparison to a reference population based on one or more health outcomes. So essentially, populations that have health disparities are socially disadvantaged due to either societal, community, or individual health equity barriers. The NIH health disparities recognize populations. There are 8 of them. There's Hispanics and Latinos. There's rural areas, American Indians and Alaska Natives, sexual and gender minorities, social and economically disadvantaged individuals, African Americans and Blacks, Native Americans and other Pacific Islanders, Asians, and people experiencing disabilities. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things to look at when you're crafting seeing if there's alignment with your concept and applying to NIMHD is to look at our research framework and strategic plan. The use of these buckets helps not only focus your concept, but also shows how the NIH views and my institute views how we look at levels of influence and domains of influence and how health disparities are impacted. For example, a concept that is, or a sentence or a research question that is influenced by this framework would be, P-Care will utilize Sika and Northern Indian community and societal influences for use of machine learning. Dietary tools for creating guidance for diabetes control, therefore increasing equitable health access to control diabetes in a culturally competent method at an individual level. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that I communicate to people or to applicants and how to use this framework, but also how to start identifying buckets of where their concept can help achieve health equity is I encourage them to look at the physical, the knowledge, the infrastructure, and economic and cultural areas. I encourage them to create these buckets so that they can start framing their concept and seeing how their intervention can help create health equity within a certain population, but also identify where that population needs an intervention in order to get services, get increased health care, or help alleviate social determinants of health for greater health outcomes. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of NIMHD funded applications. For example, for African Americans, there's a rapid point of care test for renal risk alleles. For Latinos, there's an improving health literacy program. For tribal, a tool to improve the evaluation of patient navigation services in underserved populations. And for LGBTQ, a trans woman connected mobile app delivered for sexual health promotion. Next slide. Like AAP, my institute has a pre-application program for people that already have applications or that are resubmitting. Applications open in January 2024, and applicants should be mature first-time applicants and resubmits focusing on health disparities. This is only health disparities focused. This recruitment period or this program focuses on people applying for the April and September omnibus and other NIMHD focused RFAs such as innovation of healthy living and other health disparities NOCs such as HEAL and MMM. The 10-week program is designed to raise scores and shore up application weakness. Selections based on applicant readiness focus on health disparities and feasibility of concept success. Next slide. And just to show you how this program works is we have an introductory meeting. We assess your weaknesses and strengths in your application, and then we provide technical assistance for the sole purpose of helping boost your score, but also create a solid foundation for you to move forward in your business or your business concept and using your NIH funding if you are awarded that, or to seek outside funding to help carry out your business concept. Next slide. So if you have any questions, you can email me. I'm Commander Michael Banyas. I got to change my title because I got a rank promotion. And we work very closely with the other institutes. So even if you come to me and you're like, hey, I've got a health disparities in cancer or cardiovascular issue, you know, I work very closely with our other counterparts towards helping ensure that you get the help and the support you need to apply for these programs. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Armina Vazarian, and I'm here representing the National Institute on Aging, otherwise known as the NIA. So the NIA has 4 main divisions, and your application, once received, would be assigned to one of the 4, which means your scientific program officer would come from one of these 4 divisions. They include the Division of Aging Biology, the Division of Behavioral and Social Research, the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology, and finally, the Division of Neuroscience. Next slide, please. So in addition to these 4 divisions, there's also the Office of Strategic Extramural Programs. And we manage all of the small business awards within the 4 divisions that I just mentioned. So although we are not going to be your scientific point of contact, we are your program point of contact. And this figure kind of does a great job of providing you with sort of a snapshot of what my office actually does. So as I mentioned, we administer and manage all of the SBIR and STTR awards at NIA. We're here to provide guidance and help you throughout the application process. We're available anytime to discuss funding opportunities with you, help you figure out what stage we would recommend that you apply for, what are allowable costs, and generally just any further clarification questions. We send a lot of our companies to conferences and organize workshops to advertise and inform the public about them and our program. We identify a lot of emerging technologies and develop targeted funding opportunities. We engage regularly with stakeholders such as nonprofits and investors, and we really try to facilitate connections between our awardees and our partners. Next slide, please. So specifically at the NIA, we fund many different types of innovations for Alzheimer's disease, the related dementias, age-related changes in cognitive function, and also innovations for all age-related diseases and conditions. So our portfolio is very broad, and therapeutics do make up about 1/3 of it, but we also fund many other research areas. And a couple of examples are digital and mobile health, sensors and monitoring technologies, and diagnostics. Next slide, please. So our funds at the NIA have significantly grown over the past 7 to 8 years, really thanks to Congress. So back in 2015, our grant portfolio budget was only about $34 million, whereas we just closed fiscal year 23 with about $150 million, which really goes to show that Alzheimer's and aging-related research has really taken a priority over the past decade. And we really now have the means to actually fund more innovative research in this. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Davis mentioned before, our funding follows the typical NIH funding, but our budgets are a little bit different. So as mentioned again, for phase 1, this is really for discovery and feasibility. Our awards are up to 1 year, and budgets go up to about $400,000 for general applications. So these are the general aging-related research applications. But if your technology or your product is specific to Alzheimer's disease or the related dementias, this award can go up to $500,000. Phase 2 is for 2 years, again, for full-scale research and development. The awards for general applications are $2.25 million, and for AD-related research, it's $2.5 million. We do participate in the Fast Track program that was mentioned, as well as the Direct to Phase 2 program. For much later stage funding and what we like to call our unofficial Phase 3, you can apply for our Commercialization Readiness Pilot, which we call our CRP award. Awards go up to almost $4 million, so it's a significant amount of funding. And it covers technical assistance for commercialization costs that wouldn't really be typically covered under a regular Phase 1 or a Phase 2. Finally, if you are an existing Phase 2 awardee, you can also apply for our Phase 2B, which provides up to $3 million for up to 3 years for companies to really conduct additional R&D, sort of like a continuation of their Phase 2, to really facilitate the transition of their technology from the Phase 2 stage to the commercialization stage. Next slide, please. In addition to our regular funding programs, we also provide our applicants and our awardees with many resources. It's been mentioned the AAP many times, so NIA does participate in the NIH-wide AAP program. We also offer administrative supplements. Specifically, one is a diversity supplement, which are additional funds to your award, really to recruit students and eligible investigators to really help increase the diversity of the workforce. We offer many sample applications on our website, and we offer a lot of extra entrepreneurial training. Next slide, please. So as an alternative to the AAP, and this is just NIA specific, we also started what we like to call our NIA Startup Challenge about 2 years ago, where we pick about 20 companies who are very early stage, and we put them through a 5-month entrepreneurial bootcamp where they receive one-on-one training, one-on-one mentorship, and they compete for a $60,000 cash prize. So to date, we've successfully completed about 2 cohorts, but this program will be on hold for the next year. Next slide, please. We also offer 2 entrepreneurs in residence who have worked extensively in the private sector, and they make themselves available for our current awardees to really mentor them in pitch development, regulatory plan development, and commercialization strategies. Next slide, please. So if you're interested to learn more, these links offer a lot of really good additional info that I wasn't able to cover today. Next slide, please. And if you'd like to reach out to us, this is our contact information. Again, we'd love to hear from you, preferably before you apply. Like, we know the application process can be extremely confusing and overwhelming, and we're really here to guide you through all that. So please reach out. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Vasudev?
Yeah, hi. Do I control the slides or?
Vasu, I'm controlling the slide, so just say next slide when you want to advance.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Vasudev Rao, and I am representing NIMH today. Compared to other ICs, we have a small program in SBIR, but it's a very focused program on neuroscience. And I know Northeastern has a big behavioral neuroscience department, and there are a lot of grants that go to Northeastern from NIMH. So I think some of you might find this interesting. Next slide, please. So here are the topics I'll cover today. I'll give a brief overview about NIMH. I'll introduce the NIMH SBIR and STTR programs and priority areas. I'll share some of the key contacts as well as the program priorities. Next slide, please. So NIMH, as many of you might know, is the lead federal agency for research on mental illness. NIMH, other than the SBIR program, NIMH supports more than 3,000 research grants and contracts at universities and other institutions across the country and overseas. Also, NIMH has a huge intramural research program that supports approximately around 600 scientists. Next slide, please. So not only does NIMH support research, but it's also the NIMH website is a great website for basic information about a lot of mental illnesses. And we have a significant number of visitors across the world who want to learn more about mental health and other disorders that come to our website. Next slide, please. So the vision of NIMH is a world in which mental illnesses can be prevented or cured. And the mission of NIMH is to transform the understanding and treatment of mental illnesses through basic and clinical research, paving the way for prevention, recovery, and cure. Next slide, please. So as I said, although we have a small program, SBIR program, it's a very diverse program. Like we have everything from cell to society. And one thing I want to emphasize is that the sort of the client base for SBIR that we serve is not just patients, it's neuroscience researchers, it's clinical researchers, it's clinicians, it's patients, as well as caregivers. Next slide, please. Now we'll go through some of the key priority areas for NIMH. To begin with, neurotechnologies are really big. For example, microscope imaging, electrophysiology, brain imaging, as well as other clinical ways to measure CNS activity and function. Next slide, please. Also, around maybe 20 to 30% of our SBIR portfolio is focused on treatment development. This does not just include pharmacological treatments, but it also includes technologies like brain stimulation, as well as digital technologies like apps, virtual reality, sensors, mHealth treatments, assessments, as basically decision support tools, which engage both the clinician and the patients. So again, this is a significant part of our SBIR portfolio where we look at diverse treatment development options. Next slide, please. Also, an important part or sort of one of the things that is a gap area currently in neurobehavioral or neuropsychiatry are the biomarkers. And many of you might be aware of this. So we are really looking for objective measures of subject symptoms where there can be patient-level data analysis, which are like sensitive and not impacted by practice effects, as well as which can predict the course of the disease or treatment effects. So again, this is something that while I was looking through the grants that Northeastern researchers might have, there are a couple of grants about this, so this might be of interest. Next slide, please. So we also have a division of AIDS research, which is where I am. So we support basic research areas, including developing technologies, agents, and instruments for understanding the pathophysiology of HIV-associated CNS dysfunction, the neuroimmune interactions, for technologies for diagnosing neuropsychiatric comorbidities, alleviating the symptomatology of HIV-associated neuropsychiatric dysfunction. Also, we support a lot of behavioral research areas, which include developing technologies and instruments to increase uptake, adherence, and persistence to HIV prevention and treatment, HIV testing, lowering disparities among vulnerable populations, and increasing HIV care engagement, developing effective strategies for reducing HIV and/or mental illness stigma and discrimination. Next slide, please. So one of both NIMH and NINDS are also part of the BRAIN initiative. Here with the BRAIN initiative, you can look up more at this link. Just want to say that there are a lot of SBIR, STTR grants that are supported by the BRAIN initiative, which involve neurotechnology development, including hardware, software, and wetware. And we have got a lot of exciting applications in the SBIR, STTR space from several universities with the BRAIN initiative. So this is something your behavioral neuroscience researchers can look into. Next slide, please. So here I just want to emphasize some key factors when it comes to technology development in terms of how you can align it from the perspective of university researcher and transitioning it into SBIR, STTR. So there are two parts to it. One are the scientific goals, and the other part is the business strategy. So I'm sure you're all sort of, all the researchers will be familiar with the scientific goals because these are very much in line with how a standard R01 or R21 grants would be. But when it comes to business strategy, it is important to look into like the unmet market need, identifying customer and stakeholder segments, technology adoption, also think about manufacturing, cost, complexity, and environmental, as well as intellectual property strategy, regulatory requirements, and reimbursements. While you are writing a phase 1 application for SBIR, STTR, these might not come into play. But it's always sort of when you are thinking about transitioning from or stepping into the SBIR, STTR realm, it will be helpful to think about the business strategy so that you can write a better application focused on the scientific goals. Next slide, please. So here are some key contacts, and I think these slide sets will be shared. So Dr. Meg Grab, she is the main NIMH SBIR coordinator for NIMH, and we have a few other program officers. And again, as our colleagues told, please don't hesitate to contact program staff. We are here to educate and support you. Next slide, please. And here again, here is a brief, like one slide. If you just don't want to go through all the slides, just one slide to kind of look at what are all the technologies NIMH supports. And if you scan the QR code over there, you can go to our main website where there is a lot more information about these. Once again, thank you, and happy to take any questions at the end of the talks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Taryn Albrecht with the NINDS Small Business Program. So the NINDS mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the brain and the nervous system and use that knowledge to reduce the burden of neurological disease for all people. Our mission space encompasses hundreds of neurological disorders. Listed on the slide are some of the big ones. Next slide, please. In addition, we support about $80 million annually in SBIR and STTR funding, and our applications and supported companies span many technologies, including small molecules, biologics, diagnostics, biomarkers, clinical tools, and research tools, and across all the stages from discovery to early stage clinical trials, and again, many, many indications. Next slide, please. And so, as everyone else has said so far, we participate in the kind of same announcements as everybody else, but we do have different budget limits. So our phase 1 feasibility proof of concept projects, the standard limit is $300,000. If you fall into one of our waiver categories, you can request up to $700,000. And we allow projects anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for phase 1. And in phase 2, the standard limit is around 2 million, just under now. With the waiver topic, you can request up to 3 million. And again, we allow projects from 2 to 3 years there. And we participate in the fast tracks, the direct phase 2, the phase 2B, we currently only, and the commercial readiness pilot, we're currently only participating in the 300K level of the commercial readiness pilot. Next slide, please. Okay. So we do lots of things, and we have lots of partnerships within NINDS. So one of the things that makes us a little different is we have our typical SBIR and STTR grants, and we live in the Division of Translational Research at NINDS. And so we also have a number of U44 programs, which are cooperative agreements with annual milestones. And there are tracks for small molecules, biologics, neurotechnology, and biomarkers. And then we also participate in a number of trans NIH programs, as well as, much like the other institutes, we do NIH Blueprint, Brain Initiative, the HEAL Initiative, Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease-related dementias, as well as NeuroNext and SPAN. Next slide, please. Okay, so we participate in the omnibus solicitations for all the clinical trial not allowed projects. And then if you are applying for a clinical trial that would fall into the NINDS mission space, we have our own specific announcements through NINDS, and we do not accept applications to the omnibus clinical trial announcements. And then those are all the standard due dates. Next slide, please. And then these just list our NINDS translational U44 programs. Next slide, please. And the specific announcements for the Brain Initiative, HEAL, and Alzheimer's disease-related dementias. Next slide, please. And this is our team. And I cannot emphasize enough, just like everybody else, if you have a specific AIMS page and you think it might be us, or you're even not sure, please reach out to us so we can make sure you're a mission fit, or get you connected to the right person if it isn't us. And if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to our website, which has lots of helpful information. Thanks, everybody. Happy to take questions at the end.
Hi, my name is Ian Nova. I'm Program Director at the National Human Genome Research Institute, or NHGRI. I'm going to tell you a bit about our mission and our small business program and a couple of unique programs we have as well today. So NHGRI, our mission is really to improve human health through advances in genomics research. And we do this through accelerating scientific and medical breakthroughs that improve human health, driving cutting-edge research, developing new technologies, and studying the impact of genomics on society. So we're interested in hearing kind of more of this vision laid out, interest in genomics and the future of genomics. We wrote a strategic vision in 2020, published in Science, that really goes through all of this and talks a little bit about the genomics landscape. Next slide, please. So the research areas we support, NHGRI is considered a disease agnostic institute. So we really focus on generalizable genomics tools and the ethical, legal, and social implications of genomics. That being said, if you have a project that takes a genomics tool and applies it in a way specific to a disease, that doesn't necessarily rule you out of being funded by NHGRI, because often the proof of principle involves some sort of disease-specific area. So yeah, this is an overview of our different areas. Specifically, I'm talking about what we fund in our small business program today. Next slide, please. And that is genomic technology development, computational genomics and data science, and genomic medicine. These are all pretty broad categories. We have some notices out right now that detail a little bit of what we're particularly interested in right now. And so I implore you to go look at these if you think your work falls into any of these specific categories. Although this is not an exhaustive list of all the things we're interested in. If you have an idea in genomics, please consider submitting it to the omnibus solicitation. In particular, I'm going to talk a bit about our genome technology program. So if you have a small business program or a small business idea that falls into the category of genomic technology, and you get funded, this will make you eligible to join our genome technology program. Next slide, please. So the Genome Technology Program, or the GTP, is a group grants that are all brought together under an umbrella, and this is coordinated through our Technology Development Coordinating Center, or TDCC. So currently in our GTP, we support 70+ grants. This is a mix of R01s, R21s, and the SBIR and STTR awards. So if you join the Genome Technology Program, you'll become part of this network. These are projects in nucleic acid sequencing, technology development, single molecule protein sequencing, kind of more broad genome tech dev, which covers things like single cell sequencing and other high throughput methods. And lastly, synthetic nucleic acid tech development. That's genome synthesis or nucleic acid synthesis. So if you're interested in seeing what we already support, on the TDCC website, there's this nice interactive pinwheel diagram, and you can click on each different part of it, and it'll show you the active grant programs. Next slide, please. So the goal of this program is to accelerate the development of novel genomic methods and technologies, and we really do this through refinement of technologies, benchmarking, and early dissemination to the broader scientific community. So if you're part of our GTP, the Technology Development Coordinating Center will perform outreach for various goings-on related to your project through their community of grantees and their broader social media presence. Also, it will make you eligible to join our Advances in Genomic Technology Development annual meeting, which happens every summer. And this is a collaboration between all our GTP grantees where they share ideas, and really the idea is to foster collaboration between different projects. There's also monthly coordinated talks among the GTP members on different topics. And so as a member, you will get to participate in this as well. Really, the goal is to bring the technology development community and genomics together and give them a place to share ideas and talk about currently what's going on. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit of recent success, I think, that's born out of our small business program, but also our genome technology program through this collaboration. Recently, the publication of the complete sequence of the human genome through the telomere to telomere project was published. And if you look in the details here, there are many small businesses involved in this that were funded directly by NHGRI, and just highlighted 3 of these here: Circulomics, Arima Genomics, and Dovetail Genomics. Part of this is through funding they got through the SBIR program at the early stage. It led to successful companies. So if you're interested in becoming part of this program, please contact me. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to harp on that a little bit more. So I'm program director focused on genomic science. If you have a question specifically more about genomic medicine, please reach out to my colleague, Renee Ryder, and you can find all of us by emailing our small business email, nhgri_smallbusiness@nih.gov. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meena Rajagopal, and I am the Program Officer for the Small Business Program within the Office of Strategic Alliances at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. Next slide, please. So the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, and CATS for short, is one of the 24 institutes that participate in the congressionally mandated small business program. NCAT's mission is to promote research that would ultimately result in the development of more treatment options being made available to all patients more rapidly. NCATS is a little different from the other institutes of the NIH. And what I mean by that is we are not focused towards a particular disease or an organ. That being said, we do have a high interest in rare diseases. Let's go to the next slide, please. So towards this mission, NCATS manages and funds a number of initiatives, some of which are mentioned or listed on this slide. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but if you would like to learn more about these programs, I recommend that you please visit our NCATS website and read about them. Next slide, please. So you heard my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Davis, talk about the phases of the NIH SBIR STTR program. The USSBA set budget hard cap for a phase 1 is about $306,000. And for a phase 2, it is about $2 million. And each institute have their own topics of high interest, what we call waiver topics. And if you wish to apply under one of the NCATS waiver topics, you can request up to about $350K for a phase 1 and up to $2 million for the phase 2. And that is in total cost over the period of 2 years for the phase 2. NCATS also participates in the phase 2B mechanism under the omnibus solicitation. And the goal is to support small businesses with extra funds so that they can get through a key inflection point, like say IND filing. We provide up to $1 million per year for up to 3 years. Under the phase 2B program, and we also participate in the Small Markets Award that NHLBI is leading. Next slide, please. So NCAT small business interest can broadly fall under one of these 3 topics listed in the slide, right? So it's preclinical drug discovery and development, biomedical, clinical, and health research informatics, and clinical dissemination and implementation research. And please note that there are a number of subtopics under each one of these. And I encourage you to, again, check out our website to learn more about them. I have included a pie chart that represents our grant portfolio to give you all a sense of the types of projects that NCATS typically funds. It's clear from the pie chart that a big chunk of it, we do support tools for drug discovery and development, but we also fund projects in the rare disease space, devices, AI-based tools, and other clinical research tools. Next slide, please. So I want to mention a few resources that NCATS has to offer small business entrepreneurs and academics. So this is not just for our awardees, right? It's open to all innovators and entrepreneurs and academics. This is an in-kind service provided by our NCATS therapeutic development team, and they will help you cross the valley of death because sometimes, companies have the grant money, but are stuck because you need a specific thing that is not covered under the SBIR STTR award. For example, say you need to complete tox studies to be able to successfully file an IND. Our therapeutic development team can help you complete these experiments. The slide here is a menu of services provided by our colleagues that range from medicinal chemistry, lead optimization to regulatory support. Let's go to the next slide. So in this regard, NCATS has 2 programs. One is called the Bridging Interventional Development Gaps program, and you can enter the program after having identified a clinical candidate. And the idea, again, is for us to do a gap analysis to know what you need to get you to that IND filing stage. Our NCATS team works with various modalities like small molecules, gene therapy, etc. Next slide, please. Another very similar program is called the Therapeutics for Rare and Neglected Diseases. But with this program, you can enter at any stage of the preclinical development, right? But the only caveat is that you must be working in an FDA-designated orphan disease or a World Health Organization-defined neglected and rare disease. Gap analysis is done, and our team will work with you closely and partner you up with our CROs so you can get the data that you need and help you get through that, again, get to that IND filing stage. Please note that applications to both the Bridges and the Trends program are accepted on a rolling basis. I encourage you to, again, check out our website to learn more about them. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with the right point of contact for these two programs. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I have listed some ways by which you can stay in touch with NCATS, and I would encourage you to scan the QR code to learn more about our small business program and also get to know about the specific NCATS-specific targeted funding opportunities. Again, please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, and I'll be happy to meet with you one-on-one to discuss if your project would be a good fit for NCATS. Thanks everyone for your attention, and happy to take questions during the Q&A session.
Hi, good morning. I'm Danny Goffett, a program officer at the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, specifically within the Division of Kidney, Urologic, and Hematologic Diseases, and I'm NIDDK's SBIR coordinator. Next slide, please. So the mission of the NIDDK is quite broad. It includes many chronic, common, consequential, and costly diseases, from diabetes to obesity, liver diseases, chronic kidney disease. And NIDDK uses our small business programs to help accelerate discoveries from the bench to the bedside. Next slide, please. In any given year, our portfolio is made up of projects on drugs, devices, diagnostics, software, and research tools. This distribution is from fiscal year 2022, but it's quite typical, with about half of the projects involving development of new drugs or cell therapies, and then roughly 20 to 25% new devices or new diagnostics, but this varies with the specialty. For example, surgical specialties might support more projects involving devices, but where most of our portfolio is investigator initiated. So really your ideas whenever they're ready. Next slide, please. NIDDK is participating in 3 of the 4 omnibus solicitations or parent funding opportunities. We only accept SBIR clinical trials, not STTR clinical trials. We encourage you to review our program descriptions and research topics document that's updated annually. And at any given time, we're participating in just a handful of targeted solicitations right now. The CRP Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program that others have touched on. We also publish a variety of notices of special interest to indicate programmatic priorities. For example, from my scientific division, the Division of Kidney, Urology, and Hematology, we currently have a NOSI out for next generation approaches to renal replacement therapy, including vascular access. Next slide, please. You've seen this graphic before, so I won't go into it, only to say that the NIDDK publishes budgetary guidance. Phase 1 budgets, we generally consider up to $325,000 total cost. Phase 2 applications up to $2 million total cost, generally no more than $1 million per year. Phase 2B applications up to $3 million total cost, again, generally less than $1 million per year. Those are guidelines. The CRP is formally capped at $1 million total costs at the NIDDK. Next slide, please. We have programs that span the innovation pipeline. Investigator-initiated grants can be submitted as R01s, or from a small business as an SBIR or STTR. We also have programs early in the pipeline to support that concept development or initial design and prototyping. One for extremely high-risk innovative programs is called the Innovative Science Accelerator Program, or ISAC. And also in the space of kidney, urologic, and hematologic diseases, we have an R21 program for development of tools and technologies that will be catalytic, that is, tools that won't necessarily just support one future project, but will be available to the community to test many hypotheses. Links to those programs can be found on the bottom left. Next slide, please. There are many SBIR and STTR related programs, again, throughout this pipeline. As I mentioned earlier, NIDDK supports Phase 2B and CRP applications. We also support the SBIR Diversity Supplement Program. And then many of the other programs that you've heard about already are available to grantees at various stages, technical and business assistance for tasks that are generally not supported by the SBIR programs. We support business education programs that are led by other institutes or NIH-wide, including the C3I program from NIBIB and the NIH I-Corps program. Hopefully the community is also aware of the 5 reach hubs supported throughout the US that support pilot projects with various wraparound services to help lead to future SBIR applications. Next slide, please. We also support various discovery programs that are intended to help fill this pipeline. Highlighted 2 on this slide, again from my scientific division, one on identifying repair pathways in kidney disease, as well as engineering kidney tissue. Another on precision medicine in acute and chronic kidney diseases. Next slide, please. One example that I'll just expand on very briefly is the Kidney Precision Medicine Project, which aims to ethically obtain and evaluate with various omics technologies kidney biopsies from participants with acute kidney injury or chronic kidney disease. These are diseases that are not typically biopsied. With those omics data as well as clinical phenotyping, the goal is to define subgroups, identify critical cells, pathways, and targets for novel therapies, and create an open access kidney tissue atlas that you can find at kpmp.org. And via this atlas, we hope the research community will generate and test their own hypotheses and take these pathways, diagnostics, research tools, and drug targets into SBIR applications. Next slide, please. We have 3 scientific divisions: the Division of Diabetes, Endocrinology, and Metabolic Diseases, the Division of Digestive Diseases and Nutrition, and the Division of Kidney, Urologic, and Hematologic Diseases. Program officers represent each of these divisions and would be happy to receive your specific aims page and answer any questions about our programs. Thank you.
Okay, so before we go to questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you want to just keep up to date with general small business program updates, I've included the link to the NIH and SEED biweekly newsletter, as well as the guide for grants and contracts. I'd also encourage everyone to follow the SEED office on Twitter at NIH SEED, as well as the LinkedIn page. And if you have any general inquiries, you can reach out at seedinfo@nih.gov. And I think with that, we can move into the Q&A.
So, Stephanie and team, I want to thank everyone for accepting CRI's invitation. I think it was a really good and informative webinar. So as we go into Q&A, please post your questions in the Q&A channel, and I'll ask them. Okay. So let's go in the sequence. So what is I-Corp? Stephanie, would you want to take that?
So I mentioned I-Corp. I realized I didn't provide as much detail as I would like. So I-Corp is a program that's available to current phase 1 and early stage fast track grantees. That it's an admin supplement program that supports companies as they go through 8 weeks of basically intense customer discovery. So I-Corp participants are required to complete 100 interviews with potential customers and end users over the course of 8 weeks. It is a very time-intensive program, but it is very useful. Some of the attendees, you might have heard of the NSF I-Corp program, but this one is very heavily based on it. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. So we just had the first due date for I-Core yesterday, but the next due date is going to be, I believe, on January 29th. So I'm going to put the link to that in the chat now.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Does NIMHT support platform gears toward improvement of health equity?
Well, I'm going to turn that question over to Commander Banyas.
Hi, can you please restate the question, please?
Yes. Does NIMHT support platform geared towards improvement of health equity?
Absolutely. In fact, as I said in my presentation, like whether it's a health services or a digital health platform, that is something that we do fund. The one thing I would recommend is that it be focused on one or more health disparities populations. Don't try to say we're going to try to create health equity for everyone. Just remember when you're applying for like phase 1 and phase 2, it's better to have a very focused customer population that you want to with a research question that can help answer the research question, but also comes across that the intervention is going to have impact.
All right, thank you. The next question is, does participation in the AAP affect the odds of success during the advisory council meeting? And that's another question. Do the institutes apply higher pay line cutoffs for AAP applicants, first-time applicants?
So that's a great question. So the answer is, unfortunately, the small business program doesn't have an early stage investigator pay line like the R01 programs do. So the AAP isn't going to provide an advantage during the funding decisions that are made during advisory council. What I will say is that our colleagues at the National Cancer Institute have done a program evaluation for the NIH Applicant Assistance Program, and they did find that as a whole, applicants who participated in the AAP had higher scores and had a tendency to get discussed more often during peer review than counterparts that did not participate in the AAP. So it's not really going to provide you an advantage during advisory council, but that being said, what we have seen is that our participants have been more likely to score higher after their participation in the AAP.
Okay, and anything with regard to the pay line, Stephanie?
So that's really going to depend on the institute or center. So some institutes and centers have pay lines for small business grants. So for example, Ken mentioned that NIAID has pay lines for all of their mechanisms. NHLBI, we have pay lines for phase 1 SBIRs, and then we use what's known as a zone of consideration for all other mechanisms. What that means is that we are going to look at a range of scores, so namely priority scores 10 to 40. And within that range, we are going to look at several different factors to make our funding decisions.
Thank you. So while we are waiting for more questions, I think I do have a few questions. So Stephanie, when you gave the introduction, you said that there are some basic eligibility requirements. One of that was 50% or more ownership with the US entity. Yes. And you also said that it is required at the time of the award. So can you maybe talk about the distinction, like application versus the award and all of that?
That's a great question. So when you apply for a small business grant, all of those eligibility requirements, you don't need to meet those yet. The idea is that, in some cases, for example, we'll have a company that maybe is 40% US owned, but not 50% or 51%, make that. And so basically, between the time when you apply and when your award is going to go out, so usually that's a delay of 6 to 9 months, it is expected that the company will make the arrangements needed to meet those eligibility requirements. And what that means is that if your application is selected for probable funding, you're going to be contacted by your program officer and your grants management specialist during a procedure known as just-in-time. So just-in-time is where all of the documents that are required to make that award are gathered. And one of the things that is going to be required is you will be required to provide documentation that your company meets those eligibility requirements during that JIT period. So that's not something that you're going to be required to provide when you apply. The NIH generally only requires that for companies that are being considered for funding, mostly due to program officer and grants management specialist bandwidth.
So Stephanie, as a follow-up question, does JIT happen after the advisory council meeting?
Yes. So sometimes JIT will start before advisory council, because different institutes and centers have advisory councils. So like NHLBI, for example, our council rounds are fairly late. So JIT often starts before that. And usually that will happen for applications that are within the pay line for R43s or SBIR phase 1s, or within the zone of consideration for those other mechanisms. So getting contacted for JIT is not a guarantee of funding. It just means that your application is likely being considered for funding.
Thank you. So there's another question. If an application is submitted to one institute and it just misses the pay line cutoff for that institute, will another institute consider it? Also, the same person wants to know, when is the best time to initiate a dialogue with the other institute for this consideration?
So I'm going to leave this question open to one of my other colleagues. I don't want to hog all of the questions.
I can take it, Stephanie. It's Tarn with
Awesome.
NINDS. Yeah. So I would say sometimes other institutes that are secondary will pick up an application if the primary institute isn't planning to fund it. And I would say the right time to start that communication is going to be after you receive your official funding recommendation. So if you've received a funding recommendation that is do not fund, or maybe even fund if funds available, deferred, excuse me, you could reach out to a secondary institute. And I've seen that happen with varying success, right? I don't think, right, just because an institute is listed as secondary doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be able to take on your application. And that can happen for a number of reasons. One is something I think we highlighted a lot during this session, and that is that we all have different allowable budgets. And so if you submitted to an institute that is primary and they have a much higher budget limit than a secondary institute, that secondary institute isn't going to be able to take over the full application. And they may not be able to alter what's in the project without substantially changing the scope to get it within an allowable budget limit. So that's one reason that a secondary institute might not fund it. And then also they may not have funds available. Sometimes you'll see that applications have secondaries because they're part of a specific program. So like, for example, the BRAIN Initiative, every BRAIN Initiative participating institute will sign on as secondary to BRAIN relevant applications, but that doesn't mean that all of those institutes would be willing necessarily to pay a full application. I think that kind of covers the gist of it.
I also want to add, you mentioned again, secondary institute. On your application, when you do apply, you have a choice of selecting your primary and your secondary institute. If you apply through the omnibus, it does kind of get assigned to the primary IC by itself, but you do have a choice to select which IC you would like to get assigned to as your primary as well as your secondary. But if you don't indicate a secondary IC, then we are unable, if your primary IC is unable to fund it, we're unable to actually go ahead and kick that over to the secondary IC as easily as it would be. We could do a transfer, but it makes the process a lot easier if you were to indicate what your preferred secondary IC would be. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. So there's another question. And after this question, I do want to focus more on some of the programs that you have where you don't require, say, a company and all that. So let me go ahead with this question. So a person is asking that they would like to apply for AAP. However, they want to understand if to apply for AAP, they need to register with the NIH. So what they are saying is, like, to apply for phase 1, a company has to register with the NIH. How long is that registration process? And do they need to be registered as a company before they apply for app?
So I can get that one. And no, you aren't required to complete your registrations before you participate in the AAP. But if you're accepted to the AAP, the coach will lead you through the registration process. And typically the registration can take up to 6 to 8 weeks. The SAM.gov being the most, lengthy process, shall we say. So if anybody's planning on applying to the January 5th deadline, I would strongly recommend starting those application processes now.
Okay, and then is there a limit on how many secondary institutes an applicant can choose? And they are saying that the primary is one. I mean, primary means one, so I'm guessing it's one.
That is a good question. So there is a form in the application called the PHS assignment request form, where you can, I believe, you can request one primary institute and I think up to 2 or 3 secondaries. You know, reasonably, you're probably not going to get more than 2 secondary institutes assigned, just because most likely your application is not going to fit within the scope of more than 2 or 3 institutes or centers. So yeah, I would recommend, you know, putting the secondaries that you think would be appropriate, but realistically, you're not going to get 5 or 6 secondaries. That's just not something that happens.
Okay, thank you. So while we are waiting for more questions, I think I want to focus more on so Stephanie, you and several other colleagues from the NIH, they mentioned programs that you are coming up with now or that have been there for like kind of relatively recently, like the Catalyze program. So I would request that you provide us more information about these programs, right? So SBIR, STTRs, those are like the headlining ways to get these fundings, but then there are these other unique ways where university researchers can benefit.
That's correct. So I'm going to put the Catalyze link in the chat. So Catalyze is NHLBI's program that doesn't require companies to be formed in order to apply. Another program that we didn't get to touch on, but I am going to put them in the chat, is that the NIH supports academic proof of concept hubs called the REACH program. And so we every few years we will give out these big institutional awards to academic institutions that are setting up essentially proof of concept centers to support early stage translational research projects. So a lot of these can lead to small business grants and they can lead to companies being formed. But in order to apply for a kind of a REACH mini grant, so to speak, you don't have to be a company. And the NIH just gave out 5 major REACH awards. So they've gone to different institutions in the past, but the new ones that have gone out have gone to, they're based in Maryland, Chicago, kind of the Mid-South region, Texas, and the Mountain West region. So every few years they give those out, but those don't require applicants to have a company. A lot of these are academic investigators who just want some very early stage seed funding to support their early stage work.
Okay, thank you. So I know that Meena from NCATS also mentioned some of the programs. Meena, would you want to talk about some of those now that we have time?
Sure, Vaibhav. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so basically we have these 2 programs in the intramural division of NCATS, right? Bridges and Trends. And I think I covered it pretty much, comprehensively during my portion, but just to reiterate, the Bridges and the Trends program are available to not just our awardees, but to all, entrepreneurs and small business entrepreneurs and academics, which would be you guys in the audience. But basically, for the Bridges program, you can enter, like I said, you can enter the program after having a clinical candidate identified, right? And then our team will then do the gap analysis. And then, if you have to have some experiments done, like tox studies, then they can help you with that so that you can successfully file an IND. The Trends is, again, very similar to the Bridges, but the only caveat is that you should be working in a FDA designated orphan disease or the WHO defined, rare or neglected diseases. But again, with Trends, you can enter the program at any stage of the preclinical development. I know in the slide, we did have a due date sometime in September, and apologies for that, it's a little outdated, but I know for a fact that the programs, accept applications on a rolling basis. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to, put you in touch with the right POCs for those 2 programs.
Thank you. I think one of the most wonderful things which I got from this webinar was how open everyone is at different institutes, and that you're actually encouraging all the applicants to apply early, to reach out early, to get all of these questions answered. So we have another question in the chat. How do institutes determine PO assignment to an application? Does this happen before or after the SRG meeting?
I could take that one, Stephanie, if you want.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so every institute, again, is going to be a little different because it depends kind of how they manage their small business program and grants. So for NINDS, our small business program directors manage our small business awards. So you get assigned one of our small business program managers when your application is received. So that will occur before the review meeting, and that's based basically on a portfolio. So each one of us holds a certain type of thing. Mine, for example, is typically clinical and research tools. We have someone on our team who handles drug development, and so that's how we assign the application. And then in other institutes, the small business applications are held by the subject matter experts within the wider institute. So you're going to get assigned to a program officer who has specific expertise in sort of your disease or indication. And then you have a small business program full of managers like Stephanie who do awesome things like organize these events and come up with programs to support the small businesses. But that assignment almost always happens before the review meeting. And then you should actually be able to see it, I think, in ERA, if you log into ERA Commons. But then that same person will be listed on your summary statement when you receive it. And that's the best person to reach out to after you've gotten your summary statement, because they'll be able to talk to you about the summary statement and advice or thoughts about how to approach resubmission.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And I think that depends on the institute, as you said. At NHLBI, we usually have the program director assigned before it goes to the review, but not always. We occasionally when there's new program directors coming in, sometimes an application will not have someone assigned yet, and then it'll get assigned immediately after peer review.
All right, thank you. So we are waiting for more questions. So while we are doing that,
I wanted to just point out, these are some programs that both Vasu and Taran touched on, but I'm putting them in the chat. They had referenced the Brain Initiative, HEAL, and Blueprint, but a lot of these that have small business components also have funding opportunities for academics that have similar goals. So I'm just putting them in the chat. And I'm sure that if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to both of them for more info.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. So I think Tanya followed right after NIMH, right? And sometimes there are 27 different institutes, 24 of them are, basically tasked with providing these kinds of resources. So are there any overlaps when we think about these different things, especially say with regard to brain and all of that? So Tanya, if you want to take that, and your colleague from NIMH.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there is overlap, and some announcements have more, right, more than others. A Brain Initiative in particular, I think NIMH and NINDS hold a large chunk of the brain portfolios, because so much of it is about understanding kind of the basics of how the brain functions, and that falls primarily into our institutes. But there are a number of participating institutes and centers on the Brain Initiative, and if you have a project that's relevant, right, you can still apply and be housed under that institute. And I think the same thing is true for the AD/ADRD. I'm sure Armina can kind of chime in there. They're sort of the lead for Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease-related dementia, but that's also a shared interest with NINDS. And then Vasu, if you have.
Yeah, and I also want to address Vaiba what was the question that was raised about like the pay line and if some institutes are able to fund it. So we and NINDS, we often share many of the applications, the primary and secondary assignments. And on many instances, we pick up, like depending on our budget and NINDS budget, we pick up some and they pick up some of ours. So it always helps to get the primary and secondary, especially in the neuroscience space. And similarly with Alzheimer's and yeah. So.
Thank you. So we have 20 more minutes and we have all of these people from NIH institutes. I would encourage people who are planning to apply, who are just curious about these resources, to post their questions. So in the meantime, I have more questions. I think the more I learn, the more it's like, okay, I want to know more. So one of the things I think which was apparent was that when people think of the NIH, right, there's this thing, okay, you look at NIH, you look at NSF, DOD, there are these breast cancer grants and all of this. So early stage, right, creation of the IP. I think today's webinar demonstrated how much effort is being put in devoting resources towards translating these, de-risking these technologies. So I was quite happy that several institutes talked about how they are supporting or providing grants and money to support preclinical work, getting ready for IND. And there were even some slides that talked about clinical efforts. So Stephanie and like other colleagues, so if you guys can just reiterate that, like what you're doing more in terms of say like clinical aspect. So also maybe to put in perspective how NIH was instrumental in getting the COVID vaccines out, some of the testing that happened and all that. So if you guys can just talk about some examples that will help people, apply this to their own research or their own path to impact.
Yeah, sure. So I can start off with this and I encourage my colleagues to jump in. So I'll give you all a really good example. So I briefly mentioned that the NIH funds those REACH proof of concept hubs that provide early stage funding to academic investigators. So before the REACH hub was a thing, there was a program called the National Centers for Accelerated Innovation, which were run by my institute. And these provided small amounts of funding to academic investigators that were developing technologies and pursuing translational projects that focused on heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. So it was very NHLBI specific. And so the centers that we had funded were led by the Cleveland Clinic, by several universities in Boston, and another hub was led by the University of California system. So I'll give you an example. There was a technology that spun out of the Cleveland Clinic that was specifically for a diagnostic test for sickle cell disease. And so this project was funded through several years through this program, through this academic proof of concept. Eventually, it became a company called Hemex Health. And so Hemex Health, since then, has gotten several small business grants from the NIH. Most recently, they got one of those phase 2B grants, which are those late stage studies. And they're actually doing this to perform a clinical trial for their Gazelle platform for detecting sickle cell disease. They're doing a clinical trial in India. And so this company has been supported for over 10 years through various different mechanisms. There are other companies as well that have gotten these early stage grants, and we've basically supported them from the proof of concept funding all the way from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 2B. So I'm sure my other colleagues have other examples of that, but we've had several companies that we've been supporting through years, just as they spun out and now as they are really commercializing their technologies.
I think oftentimes investors will want to see some clinical data before committing. So I think that each of our programs are different, and risk tolerance is different for different disease areas. But at NIDDK, for example, we do support SBIR clinical trials to help companies generate typically just that first clinical data before they move on to a larger study with outside funding.
You're on mute. We can't hear you. Michael, we can't hear you. At least I can't hear you.
Oh, Mike, you're on mute.
I know since I fund a lot of digital health, there's always that question on clinical data and whether an IRB is needed. So that's one of the reasons why it's good to talk to your program manager, just to kind of feel this out. I think with drugs and therapeutics, it's very clear cut, but with services in digital health, it's often that I have to bring in an outside consultant to double check our work and provide that advice. So it's a good question. And it actually came up last week when we were in Chicago at the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, is the relevance of clinical data that investment communities look at. And I kind of wish some of my colleagues that attended that event would go there, because they got into a fairly dry conversation about molecules that as a non-PhD I was totally lost in, but how that's relevant to actually presenting to an investment firm like the clinical outcomes data and how they view it.
Okay. So I think this was really helpful. As a follow-up question, I mean, when I go to some of these business events that are more life sciences focused, when I'm representing Northeastern there, so I see a lot of focus on utilizing real world data as people think about these clinical trials, what to compare. So Stephanie and colleagues, like, are you seeing, like, when you look at these grants, do they incorporate that component in the grants, or how do you recommend people incorporate that in their path to, say, like clinical development and all that?
Yeah, so in terms of real world data, so if, for example, if you're an applicant and you are looking for, previous like repositories of clinical data that can be used to like develop algorithms or validate a device, a lot of institutes and centers have access to a lot of these resources. So for example, at the NHLBI, we have a database called BioLink, which I can include a link to, not in the chat because I don't think it goes to the attendees, but in a follow-up email, or if anyone has any questions about it, they can reach out to me. But we have several databases of clinical data that are available to small business applicants in case anybody would like to access that.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's another question. So what they're trying to ask is, like, is there data on the success rate for first-time applicants for phase 1 of SBIR at NIH? I think it may vary by different institutes, but Stephanie, if you can comment on that, or anybody else.
Yes, so that one, I'm going to encourage my colleagues to jump in after this, but for NIH-wide, I don't think we have data on first-time applicants per se. We do have success rates for phase 1 applicants as a whole in the NIH data book. So I can put let me see if I can put a link in that answer.
So also, I think there are other parts to this question. I think what is interesting is, so what they're asking is that as a single principal investigator, like, is it recommended that they apply, or is it recommended that they apply as a single principal investigator for phase 1, or would it be helpful for them to find a university or a hospital partner? I think where the question is coming from is, I think some maybe background is needed. So Northeastern University has a lot of campuses. We focus on basic research and applied research. We don't have a hospital. But then, at least in the Boston area, right, we can collaborate with all of these world-class hospitals, similarly in Maine and all of that. So I think that's where the question is originating. So if you want to like comment on that. So would you encourage that they find a collaborator at another hospital, or that kind of a place, as they're thinking about putting together this application?
I personally would. I think especially like, for phase 1s, it's less important than a phase 2, but I still think that one of the things that reviewers will look for, as I mentioned, it's less focused on just the PI, it's more focused on the team. And if there's, for example, if you have a PI who's proposing a clinical project, but they don't have a clinician on their team, that's something the reviewers might take issue with. So what I would recommend doing is, I'm not sure if everybody on this call is familiar with the NIH Reporter website, but there is a project called Matchmaker where you can put in a summary of your project and find currently funded NIH grants. And that might be a good way to investigate or to kind of identify potential collaborators who could be an academic partner on your grant. And I should note that you don't have to be, like, you can have an academic partner and still submit an SBIR grant. The key is that your PI, your contact PI, has to be employed with the business.
Okay, thank you. Kenneth, do you want to contribute to that? I see that you came.
Yeah, so I would just like to echo basically what Stephanie said. As long as you can, reasonably answer the question of, does my team have enough firepower to, successfully complete, the proposed work, you should feel comfortable moving forward. And if you are concerned about being a single PI, we generally do encourage the STTR route. I can say for NIAD, at least in terms of the success rates, we do look at about 12 to 15% for both SBIR, STTR. However, our success rates for reapplications increases pretty significantly. And so that is an important thing that I would like to highlight, that first-time applicants, do face a pretty uphill battle here. But if you aren't funded, take a close look at the summary statement and see the reviewer's comments and adjust and try again. At NIAD, we have published our interim pay lines for 2024. For STTR, we're at 24, and SBIR 27, I believe. And so that does tell you that at NIAD, STTR will be a little more competitive. However, that does just depend on the institute as well.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So for NHGRI, Ian, so I was quite happy to see the slide where you put together that there's a mix of different types of grants, academic grants, R01, R21, as well as more commercial focused grants. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how NIH looks at it at the bigger level, like they are providing funding for the creation of IP and then de-risking, and how GTP program is looking at that, and what to look for in the future, like what kinds of opportunities, what kinds of areas will become important?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, really the program, I think, functions best as like a means of collaboration between people in the genomic space. It's not necessarily a program that will help you get a grant to begin with, but once you are in the system, I think it's like a pretty big benefit in terms of in the future creating collaborative projects. And so that's something we've seen quite a bit in kind of both directions. Like we've had PIs in our GTP program that have then gone on, who had R01s, who have then gone on to get small business grants. And so I think that's one of the things we're working towards doing more, is helping academics kind of transition from the academic technology space into the small business space. And part of the program can help kind of get people in contact with other researchers that have already gone through this process or kind of used this system. And yeah.
All right, thank you. So there's another question, and I think what they are trying to ask is, are there some typical, issues that you see that recur in first-time applicants for like these SBI? So is there an FAQ page or like any kind of like, definitely look at these, or like a cheat sheet that first-time applicants can be aware of? I think if there's something like that.
So there is an FAQ page, which I can put the link to, and let me just see if I can find it. Another thing that I would add is that what I've seen most frequently is that when an application comes back and a summary statement is released, more often than not, the lowest scores tend to be with the approach. That's usually where, if an application doesn't get funded, it's because the approach score is not high enough. So a lot of those are going to be, when you submit a grant, you don't necessarily know what the reviewers are going to take issue with. And that's fine, because you're kind of going in blind to an extent. But one of the reasons why as Ken mentioned, a lot of applicants score better upon resubmission is that they know what they're dealing with and they know what the reviewers are looking for. So it's easier to come back with the data or the, the solutions that they want to see.
Okay, so thanks for first providing all of this information in a comprehensive way and then answering all these questions. We have 5 minutes left. I think what I would like to do is do like a rapid fire thing where maybe if each one of you can just highlight one program that you think everybody should look at the university if they are commercially minded and are not exactly ready to launch a startup. Like from your institute, what is it that they should look at?
So from NHLBI's perspective, Catalyze is definitely the program I would recommend looking at if you are considering commercializing a technology but aren't quite at the company forming stage yet.
At NIAD, it would definitely be our Innovator to Entrepreneur program. I did have a slide kind of detailing that. So if you have any more interest in that, please feel free to refer to that slide, reach out to me. But also I wanted to add on to the last question that Stephanie fielded. At NIAD, we do have a repository of real samples of successful applications. So while it won't tell you, what kind of the common pitfalls are that score poorly in review, it will give you a good idea of what a strong, real application looks like. I believe we have, I think, a dozen or so SBIR, STTR applications we have posted on our website, which I will share the link.
All right, so moving on to NHGRI, if everybody can just pick one thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just harp back on something we've all said, which is find the right program officer to contact and get in touch face to face, because there's also a whole number of other links that I would send people in terms of webinars to watch or specific things to look at that I think give a good overview of common mistakes or pro tips basically for new applicants.
Thank you. All right, from NINDS.
Yeah, I think if you're not ready to start a company, but you're thinking about it, my recommendation would be to look at some of either the NIH funded hubs or to find an incubator in your area, who has maybe programs kind of geared towards that beginning site part where it's these are the basics of what you would need to do. There's a lot of that out there. And there's also a lot of information from your small business administration. A lot of states have FAST programs and things like that that offer additional support.
Yeah,
From
I would
NIA,
kind of.
Sorry, go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
From NIA, I was just going to say for us specifically, it would be our NIA Startup Challenge.
Yeah, I would second some of the things my NINDS colleague brought up. Also, if there are investigators who have R01 grants and R21 grants or any kind of NIH funding other than the small business program, they can also get in touch with the relevant program officer from that particular IC and kind of connect with the SBIR team in that particular IC and see how, in collaboration with the PO who is managing the R01 or the R21, they can really try to commercialize if the technology is commercializable and fits the SBIR bill.
All right, thank you, Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, I just will echo what many colleagues have said. Please reach out to us. Please try to draft your specific aims page before reaching out. I think that makes for very productive conversations, and then also leverage all the information that's on the SEED website, especially the step-by-step prepare your application page and also the FAQs. Those really are frequently asked questions.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think we just have a minute left. So again, I want to thank the entire NIH team. So thanks from the Northeastern University and the Center for Research Innovation. So anybody who is on the call, so Center for Research Innovation, is tasked with protecting and commercializing the intellectual property at the university. I'll put a link to CRI. Please feel free to reach out to us. Also, the slides from the session will be made available to the participants. I want to thank the team that helped organize this at the NIH side, as well as on the Northeastern side. So PJ Dupoy, who is our marketing director, as well as Katie Hempel, who is our venture director. So we worked as a team along with the NIH team. Again, thanks everyone for participating, and I look forward to the next event. Thank you.